This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air for the first time with Melanie Goodwin. How you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. It's good to
Now, I
see
want to
you.
let people know we are a featured podcast on the Newsly platform. You can see that little icon up there that says listen on Newsly. So, Phantom Electric Ghost is a featured podcast on that platform. If you use coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month free premium subscription. And this podcast will be on Newsly later tonight as an audio version, because that's what they do. They convert video to audio. So thank you again for being on the podcast, and let people know that we're actually at episode 927 of the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. And we've been around since 2016, and that's tracking on Apple Podcast with that number is one of the first platforms we were ever on. And then additionally, we've got your link up there. And for those of you on the audio podcast, we've got a link that says resurrectedroadkill.com. For those of you who are listening on audio, we want to be able to tell you again that that's resurrectedroadkill.com. And then what we're going to talk about in this podcast are the growth stages of an artist or a creative entrepreneur. So with that, I don't know how you want to start with that, and maybe you talk about what people can get to on that website, just to kind of let people know what they do when they get there on your website. What that opens up.
Sure. Yeah, that is a good starting point. That Resurrected Roadkill is a memoir, and what it's kind of got. There was an argument that there are two books within one book. The first act or the first part is kind of an escape from a super toxic, abusive relationship. And then the second and third parts are the rebuilding of my life. And what that ended up being was the story arc of coming out of being what Julia Cameron would call I can't think of her phrase. My phrase is sort of a wannabe artist. Someone who is dreaming but not taking action, that kind of scenario, whether it's a dream for a business or a dream for a creative career of some kind. Oh, she would call it shadow artistry. Someone who might even believe that they're completely capable, but they're still not doing anything about it. So obviously there's some internal constraints and there's some chaos going on that's sort of self-canceling. So that's what the book covers. It covers a trauma-bonded relationship, relational abuse, getting out, and then the career recovery.
That's cool.
And yeah. It's just what I found out when I first I left that relationship, and I observed what is called the no contact rules. When there's a trauma bond, there's kind of 3 tiers. I don't know how much you're in the details, but there's 3 tiers. If you can preserve the relationship and shift it, it's probably not gone that far south. Some people have to have minimal contact because maybe they have small children and they're doing joint custody or things like that. But when it's really severe and serious and has an element of danger, if you don't have children involved, they recommend a no contact form of separation. And that's what I did. And it's kind of a harrowing book start. It feels a little bit like a thriller in a way. And I did that on purpose because I wrote it in a way that makes it a very compelling read. People want the next chapter kind of thing. But I also I laced in a lot of trauma science so that people will get a good orientation to trauma and recovery and what kind of treatments and treatment modalities are effective and which ones are not, and to try to help people understand what their options are. And then we got to actually being an artist. So you want to jump in there? Does that kind of help frame it a little bit?
Yeah, well, we kind of cover all bases. With our podcast, we initially started as being a podcast about musicians. And then the last 2 years, we've had therapists and domestic violence therapist and life coaches. and all kinds of people who are diving into what you just talked about. We had, a couple of days ago, we had people that were diving into, you know, situations that are very much similar to what you just discussed. But we've always tried to thread it with the
Yep.
creativity of, like, within therapy, people do art therapy, or they do journaling, or they start finding out, like, is that inner child. Did you want to be an author? Did you want to be a photographer? Did you want to be a painter? But then people told you weren't good enough, or people told you that that's silly. And then later, when you start to recover,
You
you realize
can't.
that, yeah, why not follow what you really wanted to do? And so that's a lot of the creative spark that we talk to with artists. Is their art is very cathartic. When you talk to singer-songwriters, almost, I've talked to over 300, almost every single one of them will tell you that what they're doing is very cathartic, and they would do it whether they made money or not, because it actually is their therapy
Right.
for their own situation.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm here to say again, I'm another one.
Mm, yeah,
um,
it's common.
yeah. So the the yeah. Oh, I know it is. In fact, in the early part of what I have written, I kind of go into a chapter on how we understand the imagination or creativity, and we are frequently told that um, the imagination is the part of our brains where we kind of make things up, and of course that's not incorrect, but I personally feel like it's vastly missing something.
Hmm.
And the something that's missing from that is that I understand, creativity and imagination as a two-direction gateway. And when we talk to artists, I mean, most people feel like, "Man, when I'm in the zone, I'm smarter than I normally am. I get brilliant ideas, and I don't think they're coming from me,"
Yeah, the
right? Like when,
muse. Yeah.
if you're improving or yeah, yeah, the muse. Yeah, the Greeks had a great framework for understanding. They were trying to tap into something that's beyond, and so since the imagination plays such an important role in recovery, but you have to understand that you're not making stuff up. Like if you're journaling and you hit on a massive revelation, you can't talk yourself out of it and get benefit from it,
Hmm.
right? You can't go, "Oh, well, I just made that up. That's probably not real."
Yeah,
So you
definitely.
have to actually trust this this imaging capacity. Like if you saw a vision in your mind's eye, you have to trust that you're hearing something super valuable.
I totally get that, because I'm a sound designer. You see all my synthesizers behind me, but and I'm
Uh-huh.
I'm a keyboardist. I'm a producer,
I
and
do.
I like to think of, like, George Martin from the Beatles. He was asked about, like, how did you get the Sergeant Pepper's,
Oh, I
right?
love yeah,
And he said,
I
"Well,
love George
it's like
Martin.
Monet. It's a sound painting." There's actually a
Right.
documentary where he starts talking about how what they did was a sound painting, and it actually kind of set up the
I
whole
love it.
record industry to think of music not as just singles, but as like concepts and albums and art that was connected, and you actually could do, what you used to end up having, the Pink Floyds of the world and the Yeses and the Jazz. You start having these bands that actually realized that the music could be very cinematic. It could be like art, like rock, or like rock opera. So
Totally.
you could go into these zones where it means a lot, and it is multi-directional. Where is that guy talking about, you know,
Oh,
about
yeah.
himself, or is he projecting, like a Bruce Springsteen? He creates these characters. Pete Townsend, and with Tommy, he created characters.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that him? Part of it's him, and part of it
Yeah, I
is the
was just
character.
thinking of Tommy.
Yeah, as part of the
Yeah.
character is him, part of it's another
Mhm.
character that he wrote. And that's, it's kind of multi-directional. As an artist, you take all your influences, take all your training, and then you feel the universe, right? So you feel, so like I could be channeling Coltrane, or I could be channeling, like like a blues guy like Lead Belly or Robert Johnson, or I could be channeling, something I just saw on a news show like a statement somebody said or a newspaper article, and it'll just creep into my work. And it's something that's inside, my microcosm and my
Right.
macrocosm. So I feel, yeah, a lot of artists, if you talk to them, they totally agree. They're very multi-directional. Things are coming from the inside and
Mhm.
outside, and
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
it's all layered.
Yeah. Yeah, it's layered and it's a two-way communication. It's dialogue with something beyond, and that's what I think is maybe the most exciting thing about being an artist. But if you apply that same capacity to recovery, you've got an arsenal of tools now that are far better because when it comes to a traumatic history, it'll rewrite the brain. It'll literally regroove the brain if you're using your imagination to kind of reframe stories or um, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Bissell van der Kolk, but he has people do what's called drama
Mm,
therapy, where they're in a small group of people they know, and they get to say, you pretend you're
mm,
my mother, you're my dad, and whoever it is that they have something to work through with, they instead of going out to the actual relationships that are frequently fraught and not functioning all that well, they get to work in this group and say what the mother is going to do and say. So they get to act
oh, wow.
out what they needed instead of what they got in
Mm,
reality, but the brain is literally experiencing it without any distinction between
and yeah,
reality or drama, and so it regrooves. It's just, so I get pretty excited. I love the imagination and creativity because it's kind of saved my life. So that would be a great reason all by itself. But for what it can do for all of us, it is astounding, and it's cool that a lot of the, trauma-informed therapists are turning more toward that than, like, traditional talk therapy, which, statistically has not been
it's successful.
the
Yeah.
best at, helping people
The
resolve.
brain is
Yeah,
very
yeah,
interesting because
yeah. So and
yeah,
by
go
the
ahead.
way
But I mean, it's saying the brain is really interesting because, like, when you
no,
speak
well
something out, like if it, like when you actually vocalize instead of keeping it inside, right? When you actually say what you're feeling and you talk to somebody, you start to make those words real when you talk them. And so it makes sense that if you act something out, that your
mhm.
brain's going to actually, build that out in a way that if you just kept it inside or don't have that back and forth, that it becomes a real memory gets put into your brain. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really how I mean, however you're comfortable, how God designed the universe or how the universe works or, we are first we have the thought, and then if we know how to take a spark and do the process of creating, we know that means getting something on paper or on digital audio or MIDI or, whatever the format is, that is the process of manifesting something.
Mhm.
But creation has to start with the spark and then the ability to, like, get it on canvas.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, yeah,
What I was gonna say before was
they don't.
yeah, go ahead. This is a fun
Well, they
conversation.
kind
You
of
go
they
ahead.
kind of like don't respect art because you can see like in schools that like get rid of the art program, get rid of the music program, and just stay with the sports and the science and the math, and they don't understand that human beings are very creative, right? No, even if you don't think you're creative, you're very
Yes.
creative in all the things you do. You create even if you
Yeah.
don't think you do, and so yeah, like trying to get people to feel like they always want to compare themselves. Well, I'm not Picasso. Well, I'm not Dylan. Well, I'm not John Lennon. Yeah, of course you're not. But you have individually, everybody has their own like spark of creativity, and it's valid and it's beautiful, and you should put it out. And you shouldn't just think, well, if I can't be but John Lennon, then I shouldn't do it. But that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I have a phrase that I think I coined, and I what I say is imagination is the lost twin of reason. And what I mean when I say that is that we go to school, and the school system puts, some value on math and science, and the ability to reason, like the ability to, add figures and come up with the right math answer. But it devalued something more mysterious, it's true, and less measurable, and that is imagination. But the reason I say it's the lost twin is because when we go through life, the only thing that makes our life meaningful is the ability to interpret that, and that takes imagination.
Mhm.
That takes something that's not on this side of reason. And artists are doing that all the time, and some people would argue that artists are less adjusted, but I think artists are actually far more self-aware and adjusted than some of these people that only believe in facts, figures, and if you can stick it in a tray and measure the weight,
Yeah.
you know?
I run into yeah.
So it is, to me, it's the lost
Well, I
twin.
run into a
Go
lot
ahead.
of people. I'm in design. I do software design. And the thing about software, it's like art
Okay,
and
cool.
science. Like when we do software, we do art
Yeah.
and science, and we actually get to see what geometry and physics and algebra and calculus does,
Mhm.
because you can then you'll actually see screens and functions and things that do things. It's like, oh, okay, that's what that algebra actually does. That's what that geometry actually does. And so it's
Uh-huh.
as a musician, also, as a keyboardist, it's like a math to music. There's a logic in the timing. There's a
Mhm.
lot as a synthesis, we deal with sound waves.
Yeah.
I spend all this time taking triangle waves, sine waves, cosine waves, ramp waves, pulse waves, and turning them into things through a theory called subtractive synthesis. It's science, but it's art. So
Okay.
it's taking
Uh-huh.
sound waves
Yes.
and turning them into bells, or turn them into basses, or turn them into like piano-like structures, or things you never heard. And so the idea that you can
Right.
take
Right.
math and you can take art, it's always been there. The fact that there's some, but there's emotion and heart and soul that is not in the science. That's what the human factor adds, and that's what people sometimes don't respect or don't understand or don't appreciate.
Right. 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 Yeah. That's well said, and, so that is definitely what I'm all about, is either using that imaging or that imaginative capacity that we have, either first for recovery, because I mean, in my case, there was no progress without some steps in recovery. And if you want, I can go over the basic stages there. And then, but for an artist or for someone with a entrepreneurial vision or dream, any visionary person, there are additional steps beyond that.
Yeah, you can start
You want to go
however you
there?
want to.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think we kind of, obviously, we're both excited about it. We think we kind of set it up, but basically, one of the first things I want to say is when it comes to recovery, or artistry, it's gonna start or come down to or come back to belief. Because I can tell you, like when I first walked into a codependence group, um, I I wept when I heard the 12 promises, and they were simple things like, um, I have the right to be in an environment where I'm loved and appreciated, or I will have good relationship. I mean, really simple things,
Mhm.
and yet the hearing of it, um, and my emotional reaction revealed that, wow, I have not been experiencing things for so long that I forgot to even hope for those,
Mm.
right? And so the first thing that got challenged was my belief. Like, can my life be beautiful? Can it happen? And so it that's one of the foundational things, but it's not like we go to that as step 1 and finish step 1 and then we never go back. It doesn't work like that. What I also noticed, and they're very similar, is that I think life has to be sort of deconstructed if you've been in a super abusive pattern or a toxic pattern. And in my life, it had to do with self acceptance. And I didn't even realize that I was pretty self loathing. So I had to work through that. And then another one that Bissell van der Kolk talks about is agency.
Mm.
And agency, I would define agency as um, maybe I can define it better with storytelling, but imagine if a child grows up in the sex slave trade, right? Their whole existence is controlled for them in a way that that young brain is never going to have any reason to realize or figure out that their life is
Mhm.
their own,
Yeah, very top down.
right? And so even if they get free, yeah, yeah. So even if they get freed, one of the most essential um, needs they're going to have is to have the realization that my life is my own. I need to take ownership of it. I can shape it. If I'm in situations I don't like, I'm the one who can make the difference. And that's called agency, just having that awareness. It's a normal thing that develops for everybody as long as their childhood is not too traumatic.
Yeah.
But for kids with a traumatic childhood, that doesn't grow up like the legs and the body size does. It just doesn't develop properly.
A lot of people can end up in that kind of very,
So
very
I was
authoritarian type of top down structure, whether they were in
mhm,
slavery or sex worker.
mhm,
If you were in a situation where you had a narcissistic parent that was controlling you and basically saying you're
right.
never going to amount to anything, then you have a belief that's not true. That's not a
Mhm,
truth, but that narcissist embeds you with that and basically says, "You're never going to measure up to me, and I'm the best, and you can never be me. You're never going to be an individual. You're going to be like you can't ever get that individuality that you need to have to develop. Like if you always you end up seeking out another narcissist. What I've found is people end up getting into a pattern where they just keep
yeah,
on replacing that narcissist with another one, and another one until they actually get rid of that belief that they're not good or they're never going to measure up. And so they just keep on replacing that person with the same
right,
person.
exactly. Totally. Yeah, that's actually a little bit what my story is. I mean, I shouldn't say a little bit maybe, but I had a birth trauma just real fast. I had a birth trauma that on the heels of when I recovered from the disease, I had a staph infection, and so that meant for every hour, like for the first few weeks, it's not clear to me how many weeks, um, but I had to get lanced hourly. And so
Mm.
for maybe as much as a month or two of my very first experience on earth was lancing. And when the nurses couldn't do it, my mom was trained to do it. And so I grew up with a extremely distrustful relationship of mom and parents. So I was rather defiant as a kid because if people got in my face or took me by the shoulders and tried to shake me, which, I grew up in the 1960s and people were just really treating their children differently then, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had people in my face and trying to get me to behave right because my behavior was labeled as I was labeled as a defiant child.
Oh,
And so I was in trouble a lot and nobody was thinking this is a traumatized person. Let's try to bring some trauma informed care here because they just frightened me. And so what I did was I fought, I kicked, and I screamed and I bit my babysitters and my parents. And So the identity that formed, and that's another thing on both lists, the recovery list and the growth stages of an artist or a business person, is identity. So I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But my first identity that was formed in my family of origin because of this story, this origin story, was, you know, um, rejected, not trustworthy, unlikable, trouble, and just kind of worthless, like would be. In fact, I had a suicidal moment that was changed radically by a vision on the heels of it. So I'm really grateful for that. But my suicidal thought was everyone in my family would be happier if I was just dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I was 11, so it's not like I thought about killing myself. I don't mean that.
Hmm.
I just mean my thought
Your
process
process was that
led
way.
me to
Yeah.
think everyone yeah, everyone would be happy if I was just dead. And so it was really like the ultimate of self-cancellation,
Hmm.
right? And so that was my mindset until it got challenged. And then I married 3 times. I married everybody I got. I had a conservative upbringing, so I married everybody I got serious with. And the first 2 marriages lasted less than 4 years because I was quickly out of there. But on the third time around, I thought, this problem must be mine, and so I'm gonna stick it out. I can't bail again. But I was with someone worse the 3rd time
Hmm.
than the 1st and the 2nd man. And what you just said, I did. I married sort of the same person 3 times. They were not the same man. I just
Personality
mean
wise.
the dynamics were playing out. Yeah, the dynamics were the same, each time. And so finally, when I got out of my 24-year marriage, um, it that's when I call it my gut to the studs
Hmm.
remodel. Like, if you know any
Yeah.
contractors, like when you go
Got
in
the
and
whole
you
thing
just
out.
gut. That's what my life was. Yeah, yeah, my life was a gut job. And because there was very little structure that I trusted
You,
at
you
the
need
time.
a
And
foundational
then,
shift.
of course, when you build back,
Yeah.
yeah, I need a major shift. I needed 100 and shifts. You know what I mean? So yeah, you're absolutely right. Until I deconstructed the trauma origin and did a lot of work, I was gonna always marry narcissistic people.
Yeah. It seems to be the common thread that, like,
Yeah.
I've been doing this maybe only for 2 years, getting into this zone of dealing with these type of issues. And the common thread I keep on hearing as a podcast host
Right.
is narcissism, like inner child, people being, wounded because of the like beliefs that aren't truths. Like the idea that you're not good enough, that you're never going to be good
Exactly.
enough, that you don't. I wish you weren't born. The kind of vibe that some narcissistic people,
Yeah. Or you're just a pain in the
yeah,
butt.
they put on their kids. They don't realize how much damage they're doing, right? So whether it's the grandparent or the uncle
Right.
or the aunt
Right.
or whatever, somebody important in your early development gets these beliefs in your head, and you think they're truths, and then you get stuck in this whole cycle until you realize
Mhm.
you have a right to be happy. You have a right to not be repeating something like you're in this codependency, and you don't need to be there. That you can be happy. Everybody has a right to be happy. It's not
Right.
like your duty to suffer through everything. And a lot of people are kind of taught with their systems
Right.
that it's actually okay to suffer through. It's not okay to challenge why you're suffering through it. It's like just deal with it. And people, have this kind of stoicism. It's like, oh, I'm just supposed to deal with it. It's like, no. It seems like maybe you are supposed to deal with it in a different way.
Yeah, no joke, right? Yeah, and for me, because I was a believer, I mean, and when I say that, I mean a Christian. I want to be super careful about how I say this because I'm really glad to be a Christian. I'm grateful to God, but there was some teachings, and I kind of make a distinction when call that churchianity.
Hmm.
There was some teachings that really solidified my sense of I don't have the freedom to leave, right? Because there wasn't any adultery, and some Christian
Yeah.
churches
You can't.
say that the New Testament says without adultery you
Hmm.
can never leave. And, I don't believe that's what the whole Bible says, and that's a whole other discussion. But I did actually go into that in the book because I had to work through, well, what does the
Hmm.
scripture say? Because I'm trying to, follow this book, right? So what's in there?
Everything
So
can be interpreted. That's the problem.
so
Is like it depends on
so
like your spiritual guidance could have their own objective, and if they happen to be certain types of men, they could say, "No, there's no other interpretation than what the way I say it." And then you could read somebody else's, and
oh, and
and
I
and so the
believe
thing is, like, that's where your individualism is, like, you have a right to read it and interpret it, and then find people who believe maybe what you
Mhm.
believe, and it's not just one interpretation, it's multiple interpretations of things, and, some people want you to only have one way, but usually you gotta questions like, why do they want that one way? You know?
Yeah, yeah, no joke. Well, I think historically that I don't know, I don't think anyone can doubt that there's been a lot of harm because when the church was saying, "Yeah, maybe he's sexually abusing your children, or maybe he's, beating you half across the house, on a regular basis, but if there's not adultery, you can't
Yeah, that
leave."
doesn't seem
And so, I mean,
respectful.
things got really
That's not
messed
very
up.
respectful of
Yeah,
of
not at
of the
all.
other half of humanity. Like when you have a very top down kind of male centered universe, that somehow that
Oh,
person is
yeah.
closer to God, and
Yeah.
they're kind of like they're dictating like the Bible's dictating, and then this other person who happens to be, a woman, they can't challenge it. And when you put somebody in a
Or a
situation where you
child.
can't
Yeah.
challenge, like, something that's doing harm, and then you have to start to, like, is that
Mhm.
actually valid? Right? You have to start to look at it, and a lot of times people get, they wanna be a good person, they wanna follow their spiritual guidance. There's multiple religions that can get people into the same
Right.
issue, and the issue then is, like, okay,
Right.
why is that happening? It's like I was a sociologist, and, I took sociology, and it's like the whole idea of the
Mm.
macrocosm
Mhm.
and then the microcosm. So you have these
Yeah.
macrocosms systems
Mhm.
that can subject people to certain behaviors because certain, human traits to try to run into something that's like top down, bottom up, individualism versus not individualism, more authoritarian, whatever. You have these different structures, and people don't realize that sometimes your religion can fall into these like political structures that may not be valid for
Oh, no
human
joke.
rights.
Yeah.
So it's like okay, so then you have to come to that decision when you're ready, or when you open your mind to be able to say, hey, I got a right to actually be a human being, and as a human being I have a right to have certain freedom, regardless of whatever this book says.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. Well, what happened for my thought process was I started to think, well, first of all, going back to what you said, I think there, that interpretation of the New Testament came about in a context when women they weren't considered full human beings, they were property, right? They were
Hmm.
property. At the time that King James was doing the translation of the Bible into English, um, women were property, and so the mindset that worked with English translations, seeing it through this lens of, well, women are just our property, didn't take into account all of the provisions from the Old Testament that gave a person, a woman or a man, either one, the right to say, if I am not cared for, if there are
Hmm.
deficiencies in how I'm cared for, or in my life with this, then the marital covenant is broken already. And by leaving, all I'm doing is acknowledging reality.
Yeah.
I'm not the marriage breaker, the one who is abusive is. And but what my thought process was that led me to even do the research was either I knew God well enough to know God is good and kind, and like everything good in my life is from God. And yet, if what they were telling me was true, then I thought God is
Yeah,
incredibly
it
cruel.
doesn't match. It doesn't match,
And
does
so it was
it?
this and no, not at all. So I had this cognitive dissonance to sort out, right? And it's like, okay, do I believe he's good or do I believe God is cruel? And since I absolutely would never accept that God was cruel, I had to dig deeper. And that's when I discovered there's all kinds of provisions for doing what I
Yeah.
did. And I would to kind of sum all that up. I'm grateful for my faith, but I was harmed by churchianity. What I call churchianity was harmful for me.
Yeah, I can say if you think about the whole, being an African American, we can find the same kind of things. We can find, there are passages that were
Yeah, I'm
used,
sure.
where the children of Cain, where we're three-fifths of a human being,
To
even
elevate
In
white,
the
yeah,
Constitution. So, like, it comes from the same kind of period where even in the great American Constitution, we're considered three-fifths of a human being, and in the Bible, we're the sons of Cain. Okay, so then you get all kinds of justifications for all kinds of things. So it's very similar to the treatment of women. And
yeah,
so, like, but then a lot of African Americans are
yes,
heavily Christian, right? But they still believed that God was good. They still felt that it was and it's a big part of the whole civil rights era
yes,
was run by a lot of preachers. So
yeah.
so it was the whole idea is that
Oh, no
there
joke.
can be this goodness that you just have to show people that maybe they're interpreting this other side is interpreting things wrong. And that's what and you just
Mhm.
have to challenge it. And it doesn't mean you're not a Christian because look at all these Christian, people that were fighting for abolition. Like that was because they felt there was something wrong, right? But other people had for years and hundreds of years said, "Oh, it was right."
Totally.
You just have to challenge it.
Yeah, yeah. No, you're absolutely right. That's you've reminded me of one of my favorite quotes is from C.S. Lewis, and I mean lifetime favorite. He says, "Religion without God is one of the meanest forces on the face of the earth."
Yeah, it can be very
So,
political.
to me that like yeah, it can be used, when it doesn't understand the heart of God, it can be used to oppress all kinds of different people and seemingly justify something, but, yeah, so I just thought that was a brilliant comment, from Lewis. I
Well, a lot of people yeah, you do have
So,
to yeah.
in
I
terms
mean,
of
well, I
both
guess what I was trying to say is like
yeah,
people have these paradigms that we're either kind of born into the paradigm
mhm,
or taught the paradigm, and then you have to find out, is that really making sense to you? Is it doing harm to you? Do you feel good? If you don't feel good, that you feel like, oh, like maybe I shouldn't be here, or maybe I'm not worthy, then you can
right.
start to question, like, is that paradigm that put me in this spot, is that really the right thing? you know, to
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with
absolutely.
questioning that once you realize like that's how you feel every day, then something doesn't fit. Like again, that cognitive dissonance is like, why is that?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that's actually one of the things that I relied on a lot in terms of my recovery and my career recovery. When there's a cognitive dissonance, one of the things Bissell van der Kolk wrote about was parts therapy, where people literally dialogue with, like, and parts. The idea of parts is widespread. Most people, it would not be a weird thing at all for somebody who said, part of me wants to go to dinner with you guys, but part of me wants to stay home tonight in my pajamas because I just want to be in my PJs on the couch.
Hmm.
So there's 2 parts, and they want different things. And, without getting into it too far, parts therapy, identifies the parts of us that, like, for example, I was a non-producing artist. I was a shadow artist, right?
Hmm.
And what I discovered was there were parts who were designed to stay safe. And of course, you don't make
Yeah,
art
safe.
by staying safe. You have
Yeah,
to take risks, right? You got to create, you got to say something, and you got to
you got to
ship it,
show it.
right? All of those, yeah, all of those are um, uh, bigger and bigger levels of exposure, of self-exposure. And so, I had to take some of those parts down in addition to just your basic stuff that was part of my standard recovery, like self-acceptance, a healthy and appropriate kind of self-love. I don't mean loving myself more than everybody else.
Hmm.
I just mean thinking I had value and something to contribute,
Yeah.
right? I needed to come to that realization. And then the other realization, and this goes back to identity, was I'm an artist. Yeah, I had been so talked out of it. It's like every time I said, "What do you?" They said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a singer, and I already write songs. I've been writing songs since I'm 6." And they're like, "Yeah, but you need a backup plan," or "Yeah, but what are you going to do for money?" And so this messaging is, well, you can want that, but you can't do
Hmm.
that, right? You can't make that work. That had a certain amount of parts. And so what I ended up doing was something called identity work.
Hmm.
And it turns out that when we have habits, habits inform identity, and identity informs habits. Right? So you're a music producer, right? So at what point did you say I'm a music producer? Was it before you ever did any music production, or was it after you had done some and then you started to say, "Huh, I'm a music
Yeah.
producer."
Yeah. It's kind of
Right?
like chicken and egg. Cause
The
always like, I was into
Yes.
like singer-songwriting, right? So the idea was I didn't do covers.
Okay.
Even like if I stay at age 17, I went and
Okay.
got a multi-track. I went and got stuff, and I wasn't just covering the bands. Like every band I was trying to be in at say age 17 just wanted to cover Led Zepp, just wanted to cover whatever was in the top 10. And I was like, no, the band I'm putting together, we're going to do original
Sure.
music. And I was writing a lot of it. And I would go find singers
Mhm.
and I was writing the parts. And
Right.
so I knew right from the start that I was more, and I grew up liking the Beatles and I knew about who George Martin was. I knew he was the producer, right? So I knew famous producers. I had
Right.
read about famous
Right.
producers. So
Right.
I kind of, as a fan, had been looking at how music was set up, and I knew about engineers, I knew about producers, I knew about the guys who wrote their own songs and the guys that just sang other people's songs. And I said I want to be more like a Dylan. I'm more like a
Mhm.
Hendrix. I want to write my own thing. I
Right.
don't want to just sing somebody else's work. So that yeah, right from the start, I knew what I wanted, and that's not always the case. A lot of people I get run into music, they want to they're singers and they don't write their own stuff, or they're players like bass players and they don't write their own bass line. They're
Mhm.
waiting for me to give them the bass line. Um, and so like I always kind of like the guys who can write
Mhm.
their own stuff because to me it's like it's more interesting when I find somebody that has their own vision.
Yeah, it's funny because I grew up in a house of classical musicians. I was surrounded by classical music all the time, and I played, violin, and then I played viola. I was in orchestras for years, and I was once again, I
Mhm.
was the bad child, right? Because, when I went into practice, I did my scales and I did this stuff to be ready for my next lesson, but I just got through that as quick as I can so I could compose. And
Mhm.
in other words, the whole classical music world also is all about replication, replication,
Yeah,
replication.
all replication.
And I was like, "Oh my heavens." I mean, that stuff is beautiful. I appreciate it, but
But you can
don't we
learn.
get
Yeah,
to
I started
create?
that way so you can
And
learn. You can learn, but then when I learn, then I want to take it to the next step, and then I don't want to keep on playing Beethoven, playing Bach, playing Chopin. I mean, I started on a clarinet, and I was in concert bands, and I was playing all this stuff that was written. And then
Uh-huh.
I say, "Well, that's
Okay,
nice,
right.
and I learn how to sheet read." But it's like, "But I don't wanna play that all the time. I wanna do something else." And a lot some people just like the idea of having that structure, because some people are very structure oriented, right? So they don't know how to write their own thing. I've run into classical musicians. You try to put them in a jazz group, they don't know what to vibe on. They can't improvise because they're kind of so into giving the sheet,
No, they don't
they
even
don't know
yeah,
what to
I'm not
do
e they're
if
not even
if you
aware
put
of it.
them in. Yeah, you can't work with them because they don't know how to do it. They're looking for, like, "Give me the chart." It's like, we're not gonna give you the chart, you just gotta feel it." And they're like, "Oh." It's like, they can't feel it.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, like, you're kidding me. You're not gonna give me, a score? Like, just give me the score, and
Nope,
I'll
nope.
play I'll play off the piece of paper. Yeah, or at least a chord
Yeah,
chart,
yeah. No card chart. Just do
Yeah,
it.
yep. So, it was the same. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so it's the same with obviously, I mean, I do have an appreciation for all that because it is a different skill set and it's a good skill set, but it's not how I was made. And so it took me getting out of my family of origin. I mean, I did write a lot of songs. I actually won awards as a teenager and um you know, did do some stuff as a singer-songwriter, but I think I did it because it was my
Mhm.
therapy. It's not like it was affirmed or valued or anything else because it was just like, "What are you doing that for?" You know?
Yeah. It's like
So,
most artists, you just
um,
do it because you love it,
I
and it is therapy.
yeah, yeah. Well, and the thing about art, I think a lot of us who find true north for us realize that there are certain things that we can't not do.
Mhm.
Like I got sick. I got an illness, a disease that affected my lungs, and I had to stop singing. Well, I didn't have to stop singing. It was impossible. I couldn't cross a living room without being winded. So singing was over.
Mhm.
But then it took me years to realize that music didn't have to be over, even though singing seemed to
Mhm.
be. Now I'm singing again. I've got new songs coming out. I have a new EP that's coming out in the next 30 or 60 days. But at the time, I thought, yeah, yes, I'm super, super glad to be saying that. But at the time, I thought it's over. And so I put all of music away because I was more like the singer songwriter. I didn't want to sing songs that other people had written necessarily, but I didn't do what you did, and I wish I had. I found out about George Martin a lot later, and people like, who's the really famous LA session The Wrecking
Oh, yeah,
Crew.
Wrecking Crew,
I
yeah.
mean, right? All those session
Yeah, yeah,
guys that brought these licks and certain iconic lines that make a song
yeah.
the thing
Yeah, like
that
the
the
Funk
song
Brothers at
is, just like
Motown, like
George Martin
yeah,
did for Eleanor
yeah,
Rigby.
like Funk Brothers at Motown. Yeah, they
Yes.
they were like
Ye
the hit crew, and they were just,
e
like, putting things through. And you had all these
yes.
great, guys like Todd
Yeah.
Rundgren, and you had these, like, big producers that were known for having, like, all these studio musicians within the different scenes. You got the Chicago scene, you got the LA scene, you got the New York scene. You had these different people coming, like Neil Diamond
Right.
coming out of
Right.
Tin Pan Alley, and you got these guys doing different things. But the idea that you could, the age of the singer-songwriter, I'm a child of the '70s, so I grew up with Neil Diamond being out there, right? And he
Mhm.
decided, "I'm gonna go," and you get,
Okay.
like, you get all those great albums, like James Taylor, you get all these, like, singer-songwriters that started showing you that the song can be more than just some kind of how much is that doggy in the window or some kind of hit. It can actually be very introspective.
Yes.
It
Yes.
actually can, Joni Mitchell. You get these
Yeah.
people that are really getting into, like, they're
One of my
the
favorites.
internal conflicts that are inside of an artist, and then have making a voice for a whole generation. You get these
Yes.
people like, James Taylor. Yeah, they give Fire and Rain. It's like you get these people
Mhm.
taking these moments in their life and making it universal. So people say, "Oh, it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to have that kind of sadness and
Yeah.
melancholy and actually express it." and actually it becomes
Yeah.
more than just some commercial thing. It's actually becomes like it's art. And there's a whole thing in the 70s with the music was like art. It happened to make money, but it felt like it
Oh,
was
I
very
agree.
authentic, because it felt real. It felt like these are not just commercial feelings. These are these are not things just to make a hit. These people actually really felt these things, and it happened to become a hit.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. But also, so I was super, super keyed into that, but I wasn't paying attention to all the roles that go into making that song. I was strictly singer-songwriter. Another great example, I'm sure you love it too, is
Mm.
the Swamp Boys
Yeah,
from
yeah,
the
Muscle
Muscle
Shoals.
Shoals. I mean, it's like yeah, so that sound was the same group of guys on record after record after record who are just cranking out, iconic licks and hooks and making things just so unique and memorable that that's how you take a song and
Yeah, yeah,
make
the
it a
hit makers.
hit, right? So, I had a whole learning curve that I had to go through later. So, in a way, I benefited from losing my lungs, because I started learning about all the other chops, all the other skill sets that go into song making and songcraft. So that was cool. That was great. I'm glad to be singing again because that is my number one identity. I mean, um, aside from I'm Melanie, the next thing is and I
Mhm.
sing.
Yeah.
But but identity, yeah. You
Well, I
wanted to
think,
say
yeah, it's
something?
interesting because for years, I never sang. I'm a keyboardist. I was like, in a band playing the keyboards. I would write the lyrics, I wouldn't sing them. And then eventually I had
Uh-huh.
cancer, and I beat cancer, and I said, "You know what? I was always scared of singing. I was scared of doing it, but I was writing songs. I
Huh.
just wasn't singing them. I was giving them to somebody else." And then I said, "You know what?
Alright.
If I'm gonna ever be an artist, I gotta actually sing my own stuff." So I started, in 2016, I
Good for you.
rebranded my stuff as Phantom, and I started singing my own stuff, and then it kinda, now I'm out here with my podcast and stuff, but it was this thing when once I actually started to, have a voice, I got a certain fan base, and I have a fan base that I've been able to be out there. I'm not super big, but I started to feel better because I actually like, yeah, this is my vision, and being able to actually,
Right.
get to the point where you felt confident enough to do that, it's hard. As a musician,
Yes.
like, you don't
Yes.
always get to that point. Everybody gets to that point in a different time frame when they're ready to, but, yeah, I understand it.
Yeah, and what you're describing to me is like in the book, like late in the book, I realized that I was coming into what I call inner alignment. Like finally my desire and my goals and my activities, like my habits, my habit life, they were all finally lining up and they were working toward being not just a producing artist, but a
Mhm,
career artist. And it took it wasn't that I didn't have the interest or the desire. I had that for decades before I was a producing artist. What I didn't have was the internal alignment.
mhm,
And so that's why I focus a lot on parts work because it was largely prayer. I mean, the same kind of thing is talked about in the Bible. I know it's a completely different language because they don't talk about family therapy, but there's a scripture, there's quite a few actually that says God wants truth in our inmost being or in our innermost parts, some translations say. And now that I feel alignment within, I'm good to go. All
mhm,
right. I mean, I just I found out I really like production music. I just did a 288-minute underscore. So in addition to my singer-songwriter stuff, which I'm just about to roll out after, a 40-year chill.
mhm,
um, I really love writing to picture. I and so all those things are happening for me now because of the alignment within. And without it, think I would have died. I don't remember who coined this phrase, but I would have died with my songs unsung.
Yeah, it's like a holistic thing, you know. A lot of times, they're like when I started to kind of get the picture, they're like, I got to sing my own work to actually make it really be me. And I still like to do work where
Mhm.
I'll do like video game soundtracks or ads or stuff that don't have vocals. Kind of a synthesis, so I can just do stuff that's
Right.
like, very cinematic.
Right.
But my real love is actually
Right.
writing my own songs, and they're very experimental, kind of funk, new wave. They're kind of progressive rock, and that's not exactly what's going on today. But the way the world
Okay.
is, when you put stuff out there, you get markets. So even if a 7-minute song isn't what happens in the
Yes.
top 10, and if it sounds more like a Genesis song or a Yes song or, you know, something that's from the '70s, there's still people that will like that. And so, like, you don't have to just do what's in the top 10,
Yeah,
and you
absolutely.
can just be who you are, and you can be a working artist in this as long as you don't overextend yourself. So, but people is like, you don't have to like, and not everybody's going to be
Yes.
in the top 20, right, or top 10, but you can still be a functional musician if you find ways to do sync licensing, and you just put the work out. You'd be surprised how many
Exactly.
places you can actually play and play live. I played in New York and Boston. It's like you can actually get out there with not being as big as you might think you
Right.
have to be. And that's where the confidence kind of comes in,
Right.
where you
Right.
have to, you know, it's not be a shadow artist anymore. You got to actually be willing to put it out.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I love what you're saying about coming into your voice because that is no matter what the art form is, that's what we all have to do. And, and once you've come into your voice, um, it's I mean, I enjoy a lot of things, but I'm totally there with you. My in my heart of hearts, I'm a singer-songwriter.
Mhm.
And, I just love that composing is close enough to really be kind of the same
Yeah,
juice.
yeah.
Yeah, or at least very similar. It gives me a lot
I
of
mean, I
joy.
get so into it, you know, I got a bedroom studio for real. Like behind me are my Moogs and my Rolands and my Yamahas and all my multi tracks because I'm so into it that I just write all the time. And
Yeah,
I'm kind of like, you know, I just write whether or not anybody's gonna like it. I don't care. I write all the time. And kind of like, you know, I kind of got this thing where
yeah,
why not? And the way the world is today, you can produce a lot of material and actually have a lot of places to put it. And and then so I'm, you know, the gatekeepers that used to
yes,
exist aren't there, right? So it doesn't stop you from putting it
they're
on all these
gone.
places and then getting opportunities. You know, I get opportunities of, oh, a therapist wants me to write art therapy music for 'em, or they want me to do like ocean wave sound
Mhm.
thing for a sound therapy, or I get an opportunity to work on a video game, or I work on, you know, I get to work on all kinds of things. I get others that want to collaborate, and it just comes out of just showing up. Like my father used to say, you got to show up. If you show up, you'd be surprised what happens. But if you like just think about it, well, that's not showing up. You got to show up.
Yeah, yeah, it is a great time. It is a great time for musicians, I know. I mean, I'm talking to some sync libraries and a couple of sync agents now, and I don't have any sync placements, but that is definitely one of my goals, one of my next goals. So you're absolutely right. I mean, if you even if with an audience of like, a couple of thousand people, um, well, I think if you have 2 or 3,000 people there, you just haven't gotten out far enough yet. There's probably
Mm,
more. If you've got 2 or 3,000, there's more.
yeah,
But even with a small audience, and a small following, you can make a living, and that is what's so cool about being a musician today,
yeah. I mean, it's just a lot of it is just
or a composer,
yeah. You
whichever.
just have to have the belief. You know, I think it's that thing of people wonder like, how can somebody get on stage? Well, you know, when you're an artist, you have to figure out how to get over
Uh-huh.
that, right? That stage fright from the first time you're like a musician that made that decision that you're going to show up on that stage and you don't care what anybody's going to say, you're just going to do it. And yeah, it's a certain point to get there. It's
Yeah.
kind of like a point where you have to decide, are you going to go to therapy or are you going to write that book? or are you going to start being a photographer? Are you gonna, like, or you don't care what
Right.
anybody thinks, you're going to start doing it. But you have to get to that point where you feel good enough about
Right.
yourself that you're not always saying, "Well, what if? What if? What if?"
Yep.
No, just do it. It's like, yeah, just at some point you can't keep
Yeah.
on saying, all the like, "Well, maybe I'm not good enough." Like, you don't know until you put it out there, and so you will get people like in the net age, they will just say they don't like it. Well, that doesn't mean you hang it up just because they don't like it, because there's always somebody who doesn't like something.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah, they're just not your audience, that's all. You you could maybe even, get along great in some other context, they're just not your audience. It's funny, what's happened to me in my art making is that I'm not saying it's not therapeutic anymore, it is still therapeutic, but it used to be, uh, totally therapeutic, and that was the reason I did it, whereas now, when I make art, I'm thinking a lot more about who I'm making it
Mhm.
for than I am about, and I don't mean that in a, some
No,
capitalistic,
you gotta know your audience.
I gotta, write this formulistic thing. Yeah, yeah, no, I mean something more like, it's an act of service now. In other words, I'm still telling the truth, I'm still being personal and working toward being universal, but it's like, okay, I'm an artist, and that's really what I'm here to do and
Mhm.
be and do. And so it's kinda like a
Yeah,
baker
yeah.
serves bread. It's like, here's what I got, I got this loaf and I got that loaf, and, you can take it or leave it, it's fine. But what I'm here to do is serve my bread, you know?
But then, yeah,
And,
you start getting into that
that's
groove.
that's been a very cool
Well, I
shift.
think you get like, when you're an artist, like, I remember I was
Yeah.
17, I was writing my first songs, and it's like, "Okay, are we really gonna play these in front of anybody?" And at a certain point, you start getting into the flow. You get into the groove, and the rest of the band start nodding their head, and then the hanger-ons nod their head, and then you start getting buzzed, and people in the school start saying, "Yeah, that sounds good." It's like, so you start getting, like, the permission from the audience. It's like, "Yeah, what you're doing is hitting." That you're
Yep.
because there is this kinda connection when you're a musician with the audience,
Yeah.
where you can have compared to other artists, like writers,
Totally.
you get immediate feedback from your audience when you're a live musician. You get to immediately know if what you're doing is working or it's not working. And that's,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's in the room.
right
It's
there, and that's
right
kinda
there.
cool, you know?
Yeah, it is. It is. I do love that. But I have to say that I'm trying to say that something positive shifted, that, when I was just doing art for my own recovery's sake, um, I mean, I had the same skills, and I had definitely come into my own voice, quite a long time ago as a musician, I mean. Um, but, uh but I was inward focused, I guess, might be a good way to put it, and now it's
Mhm.
more outward. It's like, "Hey, let's share, let's have fun, let's grow, um, let's benefit from one another." And so it's just it's I like what's happened since I did my own recovery, because it's now it's for sharing.
Yeah, I think that's the whole thing, like, when it
If
becomes.
that makes any sense, I don't.
Yeah, it does. It's like, because a lot of music, I have songs that are therapeutic, and they're kinda like, "Okay, this song is just for me." And it's a demo, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna really present it. It might have actually triggered me to write another song that then I present that one. And then the
Right.
idea is like, and then you get, yeah,
Yes.
and so then you get to this point where it's like, okay, I know which ones are for me, and I know which ones are actually for the world, and I learned how to, figure out that it's like a process. It's like sometimes, like as a musician, like I go through all these demos and all these things that kind of lead me, and it's not a failure. People say, "Oh, you all these failed songs." They're not failures. Like, if you had 99 songs and on the 100th song, that's the one that
Right.
you actually present, that's a process that got you to that point. I don't look at it as a failures, like, those aren't failures,
Exactly.
those are steps in the on the ladder that got me to there,
Steps.
to that point.
Right. Absolutely. And you mentioned another point when, in terms of like the growth stages of an artist. One is like appreciating the art, right? We've already talked about that. We're appreciating who you are, protecting who you are as an artist. I think most artists are more sensitive than the average bear. And so that means we have to understand what to protect ourselves from. That almost universally is a lot of negativity, and we have to learn how to deal with rejection, but it's the negativity,
Yeah,
that we
yeah,
have to
yeah,
protect ourselves from. At least we can't make room for it in our own head. We can't have it there, not too much anyway. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, I am an artist. I'm looking out for the artist that's in me. I value the work. I see other people valuing the work. And now it's like, how do I understand my artistic process better, right? So that I can just be more prolific and do better work because we're always
yeah,
trying to up
yeah, yeah.
level.
What I find is I get a lot of people to help me to, like, listen, or I'll find places to, like, like authors will
Uh-huh.
have beta groups to, like, beta readers. I've talked to a lot of
Yep,
authors, and it's like, you send it to the beta
totally.
reader, you have your editor, you have these groups that you'll try things on. Musicians are the same thing. You have trusted musicians that you
Stages.
work with for 20 years, right? And like, I'm gonna send you this. Like, is this really it or not? And then what happens a lot of times is the song I thought was it,
Yeah.
and they're saying this other song is it. And I'm like, "Oh, really?" It's like and
It's not
sometimes it's like I said, "Okay,"
okay.
I let the world kinda tell me because you never know. Because so a lot of times artists, like, I pick the song I like is not the song the fans like. And I'm like, "Oh, that's
Uh-huh.
interesting." 'Cause
Yeah, yes. Yeah, it is interesting.
so you have to be
Yeah, I
willing
mean,
to
it's
kinda
fun when somebody
let
else
it
says,
go.
"No, this is the one that's cooking."
Yeah, well, you have to
Yeah.
let it go because a lot of times, like, your ego is like, "Well, I really
Yeah.
want this one to go through," and we have to, like, let some things go in order to progress. And sometimes you let go of the thing that you thought
Yes.
was it, and somebody else, these other people have told you, "No, this one's the one that's it."
Mhm.
And you're like, "Oh." And
Mhm.
when I was younger, I was like, "Oh," I used to get upset. And then
Yeah.
now as I older, I'm like, "Okay." I kinda live with it. It's like, "Okay, that's the way that way it works." And I accept it, but it's hard.
I think one of the coolest things to be a more mature artist, one of the coolest things is, and I mean mature, I guess I mean in terms of artistry and just plain an older human being. I mean both. Is that I realize now that we do our best, but when we create a lot of times with if you're composing and producing with gear. I mean that's pretty solitary. So now what's happened is my community of fellow artists is priceless to me for that very reason you're talking about because they're the ones that are like, okay, maybe this one didn't come easy and but this is the one
Mhm.
that's happening. This is
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is the one. Yeah. Or just, hey, that's almost there. But I thought you might have gone this other direction with it. And you go, huh,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, good idea. So it's the community around me that helps me stay well, that helps me
Yeah,
keep
that's how you
growing.
grow. 'Cause
Absolutely. I
yeah, I
trust
mean,
them.
we're
I
probably gonna
trust.
we actually hit, like, the hour mark, but I, like, finished at the point of, like,
Oh,
will because what happens, with artists is, like, you get these ideas, and you're kinda, like, totally wedded to the idea, and then sometimes, like, producers or other
oh, yeah.
bandmates or other people around you, other artists, even, like, a fan, a hardcore fan that's, like, a listener in a listener group, and they go, like, "Yeah, Peg,
Yeah.
this is the one. This, and they actually been right a lot, and you're like, oh, wow, okay. because you never know. Because then you get the maturity is to kind of be willing to listen. And sometimes I do hold on to one thing and say, this one's still going to be in the record because this is part of
Yep,
the concept, but that might not be the
yep,
single. So you would start
yeah,
to make compromises and you make changes, and sometimes you hold on to something because yeah, that's core to what I'm trying to do, and other ones say, okay, I can let that one go. But yeah, I
e
think it's just kind of how you mature
absolutely.
as a person, what you're willing to hear feedback. And I think at the lesson is like you kind of need to have listening skills in the world if you ever want to get past a certain point. Because if you don't listen to other people, how are you ever
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
progress?
how you gonna grow? Yeah, yeah, no, that's great, that's absolutely right. Uh, this has been a very
Well,
fun
thank you. Yeah, like I
conversation.
said, you'll have you come back when your album is ready or the songs are ready. But I like people to go to resurrectedroadkill.com to check out
Yeah,
your work there. That will be clickable when we're fully published. We're going to be
yeah,
published on almost every platform you can watch or hear a podcast. We're on all the major platforms. Like I said, we're going to give your audience a landing page and they can listen or watch however they want. Right now, we were on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch,
okay.
and we're going to have more channels to be on by tomorrow. We just got to migrate that through. But thank you again for being on the Family Electric Ghost podcast. We appreciate every guest that comes on that has their point of view, and it's really cool to talk to people like yourself. Musicians are where I started, and creative people who are primarily who I
Yeah,
talk to. Yeah, but we've opened it up to many other types of people, and
mhm,
it's just always fun to talk to people in that kind of space. So thank you for being on the show tonight.
yeah. Oh, heavens, thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking with you
Thank you.
and meeting you.
Well, have a good night.
Thanks. You too.